Keanna Barnes lived a life of privilege.
Her family was actually very affluent.
She never wanted for anything. She went to private schools, got the best of everything.
And she had big plans.
She had dreams of being a model, being famous.
But somewhere along the way, her plans changed.
Children who come from really affluent backgrounds, they want to live like their friends or be something that they're really not, so they rebel.
Although in Keanna's case, she didn't just rebel, she ran away.
She didn't have a place to live. She was on the street.
Which was how she met P.J. Jennings.
He was like big brother to all of us. If we needed anything, he was there.
And he was there for Keanna, too.
He was trying to help Keanna.
But did she want more than just his help?
She told me she loved him very much.
Was PJ in over his head with this damsel in distress?
He told us that she was in some kind of trouble.
And would his generosity cost him his life?
He was lying on his bed with a single gunshot wound.
The shocking discovery would leave the police wondering, was Keanna trying to outrun a dark secret from her past?
She just said, "There's no way I'm going back to jail."
And was PJ the only victim?
He was stabbed up on his arms, back, neck, all over.
The result was a massive international manhunt.
It was almost like a scene from a movie. They had U.S. Marshals lining the runway with rifles.
But could they catch the fugitive in time?
I'm like, are you kidding me? Really?
New Orleans, Louisiana, March 27th, 2003. It was the dawn of another lovely, laid-back day in the Big Easy.
Laissez le bon temps rouler is really kind of the phrase that best describes New Orleans, let the good times roll. And that's really how everybody here is. You have Mardi Gras, you have Bourbon Street, and the food is unmatched. It's just kind of a great place to visit.
However, the tourist traffic in the French Quarter wasn't all that New Orleans was known for.
New Orleans was once considered the murder capital of the world.
You can pick up any newspaper, you can turn on any news channel, and you're gonna see, at least 3 or 4 a week.
At some point, our murder rate was almost 500 murders a year.
And that lazy spring morning, New Orleans would add one more victim to the tally. It was a little after 11 o'clock when the New Orleans police received a 911 call from Algiers, a storied old neighborhood across the Mississippi from the French Quarter.
It's just like a little drop of New Orleans on the other side of the river.
The woman on the phone was calling about her son, 30-year-old P.J. Jennings, an Air Force sergeant who worked at the air station a few miles downriver from New Orleans.
She had been calling him and not getting any answer, and he had not reported to work for 2 straight days, which was very unusual for him.
However, PJ's mother wasn't calling to report her son missing. Earlier that morning, she'd gone to his apartment in Algiers.
She went to the apartment manager, and he went inside, and he came back out and told her that she needed to call the police.
And when officers responded, they found P.J. Jennings dead in the apartment.
He was lying on his bed with a single gunshot wound to the head.
It was no suicide either. Instead, it looked as if PJ's death was cold-blooded murder.
There was a pillow that had a bullet hole in it. It's like it had been used as a silencer for the gun.
But was PJ the victim of a random crime, fated to become another depressing statistic in the city's crime rate?
Shootings, murders, robberies, that's something that happens pretty commonly.
Or was there more to PJ's murder? According to the dead man's family, one person might know something. A young woman named Keanna Barnes, who'd been living with PJ the past few weeks.
He told us that she was in some kind of trouble. He was trying to help her.
But had PJ's help cost him his life? And where was Keanna? Had the trouble she'd been fleeing finally caught up with her? Born in 1979, New Orleans native Keanna Barnes had a solid upper-middle-class childhood.
The father was, former military. He's working for one of the cable companies. A mother was a children's book author.
She grew up with the best of everything. She never wanted for anything. She went to private schools.
She was a happy child in a close-knit family.
She was very charismatic, very bubbly, outgoing.
And even in grade school, she appeared to have everything going for her.
She was studious and smart.
Keanna was very beautiful and petite.
And she had big plans for herself.
She had dreams of, being a model, being famous.
But in her teen years, Keanna's ambitions suffered a setback.
From what I understand, there were issues in the home.
Issues that started when Keanna's parents objected to her choice of friends.
Typically, I've seen that children who come from really affluent backgrounds, they want to live the street life and be something that they're really not, so they rebel.
Keanna didn't just rebel, though. By the time she was 16, she had left home.
She was living with different girlfriends and, other people that she'd meet.
And to rebel further, Keanna left her Tony private school and transferred to public school.
She went to pretty rough schools. She went to schools that were near areas of town that were not so affluent.
She did manage to graduate, but put off going to college. And in the meantime, New Orleans offered plenty of ways for pretty young women to pay the bills.
She did dabble in stripping.
Bourbon Street in general, every block, has a place where you can go see the exotic dancing.
However, the 18-year-old had only been dancing a short while when she met Orleans Parish Sheriff's Deputy Clinton Lewis.
I was just getting off work and had my uniform on. I stopped at the gas station on the way home, and she was hanging out there with her girlfriends. And apparently had come from a club. Started a little brief conversation with her and so forth. Before you knew it, we were living together.
Clinton convinced Keanna to quit stripping.
I thought that, I could bring her back to, being a nice little girl she was.
According to Clinton, things started out well.
We'd been together for about a year or so, and we decided to start building a life together.
And in 1999, Keanna and Clinton married.
She enjoyed, cooking. She enjoyed cleaning. She enjoyed keeping the books. Everything you could really want from a wife.
But in the end, just as she'd rebelled against her parents, Keanna resisted Clinton's effort to turn her into his idea of a perfect wife.
Over time, we just had domestic problems over and over and over.
And on multiple occasions, their arguments grew heated enough that the police got involved.
When we would have domestic disputes, sometimes it would be a neighbor to call.
By the end of 2001, 22-year-old Keanna had moved out.
We weren't living together, but we were still seeing each other. And from what I understand, she was back and forth with friends and so forth.
And Clinton figured that it would be best if they both moved on.
I knew for sure that if we continued to have domestic problems, that my career was going to suffer. And first, I was pretty mad about it, but it wound up being, well, that's okay. I found me somebody new.
The man Keanna had found was an Air Force sergeant named Perry Jennings, Jr. He was 7 years older than Keanna, and no one who knew him called him Perry.
He's always been called PJ his entire life since he was small. That's what we all call him.
And unlike Keanna, he'd had a stable, uneventful childhood.
He liked things like chess and reading. He was quiet, and he was very into computer games and this type of things.
After high school, PJ had joined the Air Force.
He got away from here and got to see some of the world and met different people and was exposed to different things. And that's when he kind of started to be a little bit more outgoing.
And by 2001, he was still in the Air Force, living in Algiers and serving as a sort of mentor to his little brother and his circle of friends.
PJ was like the quintessential big brother, super cool, ladies' man, all that sort of stuff.
He was like big brother to all of us because he was older than us. He was the person that we called for advice. If we needed anything, he was there.
Which more or less explains how he became friends with Keanna Barnes.
When we first met Keanna, he brought her to my home and he introduced her to me, and he kind of told me that, well, she's someone who's in trouble now, needs help.
She was a beautiful girl, pretty girl, but she looked like she had been sleeping on the streets or something, like she was homeless almost.
Keanna spent a few weeks sleeping on PJ's couch.
He said that Keanna was in a relationship or she was in a marriage and she was being abused, and she came to stay with him for a little while.
But despite what Keanna had said to her ex-husband about finding someone new, they were only friends.
Thought it was odd, but PJ's friend, I guess our friend, you know, I mean, I wouldn't be rude or anything.
He was just helping her out until she could find somewhere to stay.
It appeared to be just what Keanna needed, and over the next year, she would crash on his couch more than once, staying a few weeks each time. So when PJ's mother found him murdered in his bed, people would soon be wondering, did Keanna's troubles have something to do with his death? Coming up, will finding Keanna provide the answers the police desperately need?
She couldn't have been involved, or maybe she was just scared and ran.
Or will they uncover a dark secret from her past?
He had been stabbed multiple times.
On March 27, 2003, the New Orleans police responded to a 911 call from the Algiers neighborhood, across the river from the French Quarter.
We got a call over the radio that the 4th District had a death and they were requesting the assistance of a homicide investigator.
The victim was 30-year-old PJ Jennings.
His mother, brother, and father weren't able to reach him for an entire day. That's something that PJ, was not known for. So PJ's mother wanted to check on him. She went to his apartment, and after there wasn't an answer at the door, PJ's mom went to the building manager to check and see if he could open the door for her.
And when the building manager let her in, they'd found PJ lying in bed with a single gunshot wound to the head.
It was an eerily peaceful scene. He was tucked in. It looked like he had just gone to lay down and someone had snuck up on him while he was sleeping.
None of the neighbors had heard a thing, though.
The theory that we had was that sometime during the night, the perpetrator had taken a pillow, used the pillow to muffle the sound of the gunshot.
But why had someone executed PJ in his sleep? It didn't appear to be a robbery.
When you walked in, it was just his normal apartment. Everything was neat and clean.
There was absolutely nothing out of place. It didn't look like the place had been burglarized.
In fact, the killer had left two things behind that thieves would almost always take.
When I spoke with the NOPD officer on the scene, his only response to me was, well, we found weapons and we found drugs.
But did the drugs have something to do with PJ's murder? The police seemed to think so.
They brought up maybe it was drug related, or do you think he might have sold drugs? And I was like, come on, man, like a $5 bag of weed. My brother's not a drug dealer. He had a regular job. He worked for everything he had.
Instead of drugs, PJ's family and friends told the police that they suspected his death had something to do with a troubled young woman he knew, 23-year-old Keanna Barnes.
Through the interviews of the family members, I was able to ascertain that they were involved in a relationship together. Not sure if it advanced to the point of being sexual in nature, but they were involved in a relationship.
According to family and friends, PJ had met Keanna after the breakup of her first marriage and briefly offered her a place to stay.
He was trying to help Keanna. It seemed like she needed a friend, and he wanted to be a friend to her.
I was like, she couldn't have been involved, or maybe she was just scared and ran.
Or was it more than that? When the police ran Keanna's name through their computers, they made a surprising discovery.
We did a name check, and it came back that she was actually wanted for a second-degree murder.
The victim was a man named Jimmy Shepard. 41 years old when he died, Jimmy had lived in a trailer park on the eastern outskirts of New Orleans in a community called Irish Bayou.
If you leave New Orleans, right before you get to Lake Pontchartrain, going to Slidell, Irish Bayou is on this side of Lake Pontchartrain.
At the foot of the long bridge that spans the lake, there's little to Irish Bayou but a trailer park and a truck stop, which is where Jimmy met Keanna in February of 2002 shortly after she'd moved off of PJ's couch.
Keanna came in late at night with a broke-down car.
And Jimmy, much like PJ had earlier, took sympathy on the pretty 22-year-old and made her what he thought was a generous offer.
Pull your car over here, stay the night on my couch, what kind of thing, and we'll try to work on your car and get it going.
With nowhere else to go, Keanna accepted the stranger's help.
Jimmy's a little cocky, but when you really get to know him, he's more like a teddy bear.
And true to his word, Jimmy did fix Keanna's car, but it took a little while. And in the interim, she stayed on his couch before eventually moving into his bedroom.
Within a week, maybe 2 weeks, I know that they had intimate relations.
He was kind of a little bit rough around the edges. It could have just been a rebound situation for her.
Whatever the attraction was for Keanna, there was no doubt about what Jimmy saw in her.
When I first met her, she was a sweet girl, intelligent girl.
He was proud of her because he was 41 and she was 20, so he thought he had a little trophy there.
But in less than a month, Jimmy was dead and his trophy was gone. It was around 6 a.m. on the morning of April 2nd, 2002, when a coworker stopped by Jimmy's trailer to give him a ride to work and made a horrifying discovery.
The house was tore up and all, and Jimmy was laying there in his blood.
He was dead, obviously a murder victim.
He had been stabbed multiple times.
He was stabbed up on his arms, back, neck, all over.
Jimmy's coworker called the police and Jimmy's brothers, who told the investigators about Keanna.
The night before, me and Jimmy was out drinking together, and she called him. She wanted to hang with him that night.
Whether Keanna had killed Jimmy, his brothers couldn't say.
I'm not real sure what happened that night because I wasn't there, but the way the house looked, it was a bad fight.
But they did have one more lead to give the investigators. Jimmy's van was missing.
They didn't even notice the van gone till I went out there.
And while the police put out an APB on the missing van, his brothers essentially did the same.
I got on my cell phone, called around, called some friends of mine, and got everybody riding around looking for his van.
And by 8:30 a.m., the brothers' impromptu search had produced results.
Somebody said, "Oh, I see Jimmy's van over here at this car wash."
The car wash was in the town of Slidell, on the other side of the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway from Irish Bayou. And at a women's shelter a few blocks from the car, the police found Keanna.
She got caught at the battered women's shelter. It's one of those things like bam, boom, bang.
Questioned by New Orleans investigators at the Slidell police station, Keanna told the officers that she and Jimmy had been drinking beer in his trailer the night before, but they had gotten into an argument and that things had soon gotten out of hand.
During the confrontation, Keanna got really upset and she stabbed him.
She confessed to the murder.
Although according to Keanna, it wasn't murder.
She claimed that James tried to rape her and that her actions were completely in self-defense.
After she stabbed him, her adrenaline was probably up and she was shocked that she did it or surprised or even scared. And so she just got in the car and fled.
Once across Lake Pontchartrain, she ditched Jimmy's van at the car wash and walked to the women's shelter, although it appeared that she'd made a pit stop along the way.
She used his credit card at a liquor store on the way to the battered women's shelter.
Since she had just confessed to stabbing Jimmy, the police placed Keanna under arrest and took her back to New Orleans, despite her claim that she'd killed him in self-defense.
They arrested her for second-degree murder.
But as Jimmy's brothers would be dismayed to learn, just 2 months after her arrest for murder, Keanna Barnes walked out of jail.
It was like a kick to the gut. Just when you think that the legal system's going to take care of this and there will be justice, you're like, she released? Like, oh my God, how is she released?
The answer appeared to be a bureaucratic mix-up, one that just might have cost P.J. Jennings his life. Coming up, the search for Keanna becomes an all-out manhunt.
Everyone was like, wait, is she really that crazy?
On March 27, 2003, New Orleans police found 30-year-old PJ Jennings dead in his apartment in the city's Algiers neighborhood.
There wasn't any signs of a struggle. It appeared initially from the crime scene, the victim was shot while he was asleep.
PJ's family and friends suspected that his friend, 23-year-old Keanna Barnes, may have had something to do with the murder, and the investigators were inclined to agree.
At the time of PJ's murder, she was actually wanted for another murder.
In fact, less than a year earlier, Keanna had confessed to stabbing her boyfriend, 41-year-old Jimmy Shepard.
They arrested her, and they brought her to New Orleans Parish Jail, and they released her.
We was all upset. You know, we've been to court several times on her, and then when they released her, we was all very angry.
It was all an unfortunate mix-up.
Once a person is booked into the correction system here in New Orleans, the district attorney's office has 60 days in order to file charges, and somehow or another, the district attorney's office didn't do what they were supposed to do in time.
And by the time the district attorney's office caught their mistake, it was too late.
By the time they wanted her back, they couldn't find her.
Once out of jail, Keanna had drifted, staying with friends and in women's shelters, until in March of 2003, she'd reconnected with her old friend, PJ.
He told me that she didn't have a place to live. She was on the street. And so he offered her to stay with him for a little while.
Keanna and PJ had become friends back in 2001, shortly after her marriage fell apart. But they'd lost touch shortly before Keanna took up with Jimmy. Despite that, when she called needing his help, PJ came right to her aid.
Of course, when he had the opportunity to help this beautiful woman, who wouldn't?
Although according to PJ's friends, their relationship remained strictly.
Aware that she had this outstanding warrant for, murder.
His father knew about it too, after his son told him that Keanna was staying with him and hinted that she was in some sort of legal trouble.
It's easy nowadays, you just run someone's name. And so then I contacted PJ. I said, PJ, do you realize who this young lady is? And he said, what do you mean, Dad? And I said, I did a search on her and I found that she was involved in a murder incident, not long ago. And he said, oh yes, she told me about that.
According to PJ's father, Keanna had told his son the same story she'd told the police at the time of her arrest.
He said that the guy was attempting to rape her and that she had defended herself.
And in light of that, PJ had been encouraging Keanna to do the right thing.
He was attempting to get legal aid for her and try to get her to turn herself in.
However, Keanna's history may not have been the only reason PJ hesitated to get involved romantically with Keanna.
One of my good friends was dating PJ.
So Keanna kind of just was there and he enjoyed her company. She was a very nice girl and they just had fun together.
Although there may have been trouble brewing, according to what Keanna told PJ's father one night when they came over for dinner.
She told me that she had feelings for my son. She told me she loved him very much. Later on, I pulled PJ to the side and I said, PJ, do you know how Keanna feels about you? And he was like, what do you mean, Dad?
PJ's father told him what he'd heard and then urged his son to clear things up with Keanna.
I told PJ you might need to, exhibit some caution as far as this young lady and be careful in how you deal with her. He felt confident that he had everything under control.
But had his confidence been tragically misplaced? That's what PJ's friends and family believed.
They were pretty sure that Keanna had some role in PJ's death.
It was just kind of one of those feelings that you get in your gut. It was one of those things where you get goosebumps and you just don't know why. It was just one of those feelings.
She killed my brother. She killed my brother. I just kept repeating that. I couldn't believe, that, because I just talked to him. I just laughed with him. I just, it just didn't seem real. You go from, seeing somebody probably every other day, every few days, and then gone for nothing, for no reason.
Keanna was gone too. She'd fled just as she had done after killing Jimmy.
We noticed that the car was missing.
Could the police catch her before she killed again? In a repeat of Jimmy's murder, Keanna had also taken PJ's wallet, cash, and credit cards, which, just like before, she didn't hesitate to use.
We were able to track down the places that PJ's credit card was used.
Everyone was like, wait, is she really that crazy to where she would leave and use his credit cards?
However, unlike Jimmy's murder, this time Keanna had a longer head start on the investigators. And based on the credit card records, she'd fled much farther.
They actually monitor her activity from New Orleans to Baton Rouge to Lafayette to Houston.
And from Houston, she'd gone to Brownsville, Texas on the Rio Grande.
So it was pretty easy for them to pick up the trail that she was actually headed towards Mexico.
She didn't intend to get caught either, based on what she was buying with PJ's stolen credit card.
In Houston, she bought 3 different color hair dyes.
She was obviously going to try and change her appearance, slip across the border, and disappear.
And a few days later, after Texas authorities found PJ's car abandoned near Brownsville, it appeared that she had done just that.
She actually did successfully get across the border.
But did that mean she'd gotten away?
We were able to get the United States Marshal Service involved.
And once the marshals took the case, it didn't take them long to track Keanna down.
She was still using PJ's credit cards at this point, and she was using those credit cards to wire money to herself, and that money went to the location where she was hiding out in Mexico.
The trail ended in Zitácuaro, a remote mountain town 2 hours west of Mexico City.
She was hiding out in one of these little roach motels down there.
And early on the morning of April 30th, 2003, while Keanna was asleep, a team of U.S. Marshals and local police gathered outside her motel room.
They kicked in the door right before dawn, caught her by surprise.
Placed under arrest for the murders of Jimmy Shepard and P.J. Jennings, the 23-year-old fugitive was extradited back to the U.S.
They had flown her via a Con Air airplane to New Orleans. The aircraft came to a stop, and it was completely surrounded with U.S. Marshals and other law enforcement with rifles, shotguns. The back of the plane opened up, and she was let off the plane and handcuffed and shackled.
It was almost like a scene from a movie. They had U.S. Marshals lining the runway with rifles as she came in.
Not that the dramatic reception made much of an impression on Keanna.
She came off the airplane like there was nothing wrong. She came off with an attitude like, hey, what's going on? Why am I here? I haven't done anything. Even when she got in the car, I advised Keanna of her rights, and Keanna did say she wouldn't be in jail long.
At the time, the detectives dismissed it as bluster, a captured fugitive putting on a brave face.
You hear stuff from people all the time, that I'll beat this charge, or hey, they don't have anything on me. So we all laughed it off.
But would Keanna have the last laugh? Coming up, the prosecution uncovers another violent secret from Keanna's past.
She fired like 6 shots at the guy.
But will it be enough to keep Keanna in jail?
They had a person missing.
At the end of April 2003, U.S. Marshals arrested Keanna Barnes in Mexico for the murders of Jimmy Shepard and Perry P.J. Jennings.
Once the U.S. Marshals got involved, it was pretty easy to extradite her from Mexico so that she could be indicted.
Once she was released into our custody from the Marshals, she was brought back to police headquarters to the Homicide Division, and I explained her rights to her as per Miranda. And she basically sat back in a chair and said, I have nothing to say.
Not that her silence did much to help her. Once back in New Orleans, she was indicted on second-degree murder charges stemming from the death of Jimmy Shepard.
My brother's murder, I think it was a snap at the moment. I think they was drinking, probably got to arguing.
This relationship had issues. It was very tumultuous.
And its end had been unspeakably violent.
It was very gruesome and very bad. I mean, she stabbed him in the face, she stabbed him in the neck, she stabbed him in the torso, the knife going straight through his body. It'd go in one side and out the other side, 27 times.
And while Keanna claimed that she had killed Jimmy in self-defense, she couldn't say the same about P.J. Jennings' death.
With PJ's case, this was a well-thought-out murder. She used the pillow as a silencer. He was sleeping.
But why would Keanna want to kill PJ in the first place? The police and prosecutors figured there were two possibilities. The first was the fact that PJ had been urging Keanna to turn herself in for Jimmy's murder.
PJ was trying to, get money together, say, hey, let's do this legally. Let's get you an attorney. Let's fight this charge.
Was it possible that Keanna hadn't been willing to take the risk? The police couldn't rule it out.
I think she just said, there's no way I'm going back to jail.
Or was there another motive behind the murder? His friends wondered if it might be the fact that Keanna had feelings for PJ, but he was seeing someone else.
One of my good friends was dating PJ. I know that he and my friend were together that particular evening. If, it was a case where she was jealous and she wanted to be with him in that way, that would make sense as to why she would have done what she did.
It appears as if Keanna had this attitude as if, I can't have you, nobody can have you.
And the prosecutors may have had a witness willing to back that up. One who also cast considerable doubt on Keanna's claim that Jimmy had attacked her first.
Her ex-husband, the New Orleans cop, he was on TV talking about how they fought.
If she didn't get her way, there was, for lack of a better term, there was temper tantrums. There was threats.
Threats that Keanna was more than willing to follow up with action, according to her ex-husband.
She lashed out many times and slapped, at me or hit me or threw things.
And he claims that during one fight, she'd even pulled a gun.
She put it in my face and I lunged at her. And when I pushed the gun up, it shot right over my head. That was the first shot. And then we kind of struggled back and forth with the weapon. Pow, pow.
He's lucky. She fired like 6 shots at the guy and didn't hit him.
P.J. Jennings hadn't been so lucky, though.
She fired one shot into his brain. So if there's any consolation to me there, he didn't suffer.
That fact did little to mitigate the charges Keanna faced, though.
This was something that had been previously planned out. This was first-degree murder.
And if she was convicted, the consequences could be dire.
She had committed a capital crime.
However, based on her behavior at a preliminary hearing, the fact that she faced a possible death sentence didn't seem to have much impact on Keanna.
There was no remorse. There was nothing. It was carefree. At one point, she actually looked me square in the eye and laughed.
Keanna may have had one reason to be confident: her family.
Despite Keanna kind of living a floater lifestyle and kind of being out on the streets, her family was actually very affluent.
And while she had been semi-estranged from them since high school, when the family found out that she had been arrested on murder charges, they rallied to her support.
They hired the most expensive defense attorney in the area.
Still, considering that Keanna confessed to stabbing Jimmy Shepard and fled to Mexico with P.J. Jennings' stolen credit cards, an acquittal appeared out of the question.
At some point, he sat down and said, hey, look, my client's willing to plead.
The deal was worked out in secret.
Neither of the families of the victims seemed to be notified that there was a plea deal in place.
Although PJ's family did make it to court on March 10th when Keanna entered her plea.
The family friend found out about it and informed us of what was going on.
And when they heard the terms of the deal, it appeared that Keanna's high-priced defense attorney had been worth every penny.
What the district attorney and her attorney had come up with is that she had pled guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter on both murders.
PJ's family was outraged.
How do you give someone like that a plea deal with a history of of violence, and it only escalated. You know what I mean? Every time got worse. You know, she tried to hurt her husband. She did kill Mr. Shepard brutally, even more cold and calculated with my brother. I don't understand how there was even an option of a plea deal, you know.
And if the manslaughter plea wasn't shocking enough, they said the sentence that the prosecutors agreed to was a slap on the wrist for Keanna and a slap in the face for the victims' families.
She would be given 7 to 25 years, which means that she would be eligible for parole after 3.5 years.
3 years for killing someone. You know, what type of deal would that be? That's like giving people permission to go around and shoot people in the head and say, hey, no big deal.
PJ's family and friends weren't the only ones who felt that way either.
The judge was not happy with the deal that had been brokered by the district attorney office. And once we told him that we had not consented to the deal, the judge said he would not accept the deal.
The guilty pleas to manslaughter would stand, but the judge imposed the maximum penalty that the law allowed.
The judge changed the plea deal on the spot to 25 years with no parole.
Her family really came unglued. They screamed and yelled and boo-hooed.
But there was little they could do. After entering her plea, Keanna was transferred to the Louisiana Women's Correctional Facility.
Keanna was sentenced to St. Gabriel's Prison outside of New Orleans.
Perhaps bitter about her plea bargain's unexpected outcome, life in prison was initially tough for Keanna.
She had nothing but trouble when she first got to prison, you know, fight after fight.
But eventually, she managed to fit in.
She cut off all her hair. I think she got like a tattoo on her face.
She even became popular.
She could be very charismatic and know how to work the system, know how to work her charm and get the things that she wants.
But was she adapting to life behind bars?
I heard she had girlfriends and stuff in prison.
Or was Keanna merely biding her time? It was New Year's Day 2013, 9 years into Keanna's 25-year sentence, when the guards at Louisiana's St. Gabriel Prison made a shocking discovery during their morning rounds.
They went to go count, and they had a person missing.
It was Keanna.
The housing unit that she was in was maybe 3 to 4 women per pod. So she had evidently crushed up some type of drug, placed it in food, and then fed her roommates. And once they were out asleep, she had broken the window, was able to climb onto a catwalk. And then from that catwalk, she was able to hop over the razor wire fence.
And none of the guards realized that the 33-year-old inmate was missing until head count the following morning.
She left a little dummy in the bed, you know, fake body.
She did get tangled up in the fence because there was blood and a piece of the sweatshirt that she was wearing on the fence.
The guards immediately brought in bloodhounds.
They were able to track her some way and lost the trail.
Less than halfway through her prison sentence, Keanna had escaped. Coming up, Keanna flees justice again.
I'm like, are you kidding me? Really?
Can the police find her before it's too late?
It was only a matter of time that she would kill someone else.
On New Year's Day 2013, 33-year-old Keanna Barnes escaped from Louisiana's St. Gabriel Prison.
Everybody was like, oh my God, this girl has escaped, and what are we gonna do?
This woman has been convicted of killing 2 people already. The fear was that it was only a matter of time that she would kill someone else.
Arrested in 2003 for killing P.J. Jennings and Jimmy Shepard, she had pled guilty to manslaughter in 2004 and received a 25-year sentence.
9 years into her sentence, Keanna decided that she had had enough.
When I found out about it, I'm like, are you kidding me? Really? Here we go again.
It wasn't Keanna's first time on the run. Previously, after killing PJ Jennings, she had fled to Mexico.
They immediately thought she was going to head to Mexico again and just disappear into that country.
The Louisiana authorities were doing everything they could to catch Keanna.
There was national media coverage as well as local media coverage. Her face was posted everywhere.
And law enforcement agencies across the country were on the lookout, including the U.S. Marshals Service.
The Marshals put every resource they had, distributing flyers, news media, and took control over that investigation.
But would the exhaustive effort be enough to catch Keanna before she claimed another victim? It was Monday, March 25th, 2013, not quite 3 months after Keanna's escape. 2 LAPD officers were patrolling the section of the city known as Skid Row.
The Skid Row area in downtown Los Angeles is kind of where a lot of transients hang out.
And when the officers spotted a homeless woman outside a store, they stopped to issue a routine ticket for loitering.
The cops pull up and ask people for IDs, and she didn't have her ID. And he said, well, you don't have an ID, you can put you in the back of the police car. At that time, she just kind of broke down, and she just like, you got me.
It was Keanna Barnes.
When they caught her, it was a relief to the whole family.
But it was very bad news for Keanna.
She had already been serving a 25-year sentence, and she was given additional time on top of this for her escape.
Although that's still not enough for her victims' friends and families.
Someone who could walk up to a sleeping person and shoot them the way that she did deserves to be in jail for the rest of her life.
I don't think she should be released from jail because she done murdered twice. I think she's a risk against society.
And at least one of the former police officers that put her in prison to begin with agrees.
I really think she's a sociopath.
It was like 2 different people. How can this mild-mannered, very well-spoken young lady commit such heinous acts? It just still, even when I think about it, it just doesn't go together.
Some secrets refuse to die. They wait, not beneath the ground, not inside forgotten evidence lockers, but inside ordinary people who convince themselves that silence is safer than the truth. For 43 years, the disappearance of Sarah Whitmore remained the oldest unsolved mystery in Black Ridge County. One woman, one winter night, one empty road, no body, no confession, no answers. The case destroyed careers, divided families, and haunted an entire Kentucky community long after the headlines disappeared. Then, just as everyone believed the mystery would outlive the people who remembered it, an old detective, already retired, already forgotten by most of the department, opened a cardboard box in the corner of his garage. Inside were dusty notebooks, yellowed photographs, cassette recordings, a hand-drawn map, and one sentence he had written to himself in faded blue ink nearly half a century earlier. The answer isn't missing. The wrong question was asked. That sentence would become the final clue, not because it introduced new evidence, because it forced investigators to see the old evidence differently. January 12, 1981. Black Ridge County woke beneath freezing rain. The roads were coated with ice. The hills disappeared beneath heavy fog. The small farming community moved slowly through another ordinary Monday. Nobody imagined the day would become part of local history. Sarah Whitmore was 28. She taught history at the county high school. She lived alone in a small white house outside town. Students describe her as patient. Neighbors describe her as private. Friends describe her as stubborn enough to chase the truth, even when everyone else had stopped asking questions. She had no known enemies. No criminal history. No financial problems. Nothing that suggested she would simply disappear. That afternoon, she stayed late, grading exams. Several teachers remembered speaking with her before sunset. She laughed. She talked about an upcoming school trip. She promised to bring homemade pie to the faculty meeting on Friday. Friday came. Sarah never did. At 6:42 p.m., she left the school parking lot. A student remembered seeing her old blue sedan disappear into the snowfall. That was the last confirmed sighting. At least, that was what investigators believed for decades. When Sarah failed to arrive home, her sister reported her missing early the next morning. Deputies searched every mile of roadway between the school and her house. Nothing. State police joined the search. Nothing. Volunteers walked frozen fields. Nothing. Helicopters scanned rivers and abandoned barns. Nothing. Her car vanished with her. No skid marks. No broken glass. No signs of violence. It was as though both woman and vehicle had simply dissolved into the winter air. Within days, rumors spread faster than facts. Some believed she had run away. Others whispered about an affair. A few insisted organized criminals had passed through the county. Every theory sounded convincing. None matched the evidence. Detective Thomas Grayson refused to accept easy explanations. At 38 years old, he had spent more than a decade investigating violent crime. He believed every disappearance left a pattern. The challenge was finding it before time erased the details. He interviewed everyone: family, friends, co-workers, mechanics, gas station attendants, hunters, truck drivers. He filled notebook after notebook with observations. One witness remembered headlights on a logging road. Another remembered hearing an engine after midnight. A waitress recalled Sarah meeting someone she did not recognize only days before disappearing. Every lead seemed promising. Every lead collapsed. The weeks became months. The months became years. Boxes filled with reports lined the sheriff's evidence room. New detectives inherited the case. Older detectives retired. Eventually, Sarah Whitmore became known by two words nobody wanted to hear: cold case. The file gathered dust. The photographs faded. Evidence labels curled with age. Families stopped expecting phone calls. Black Ridge continued living around an unanswered question. But Detective Grayson never threw away his personal notebooks. He could not explain why. Something about the case felt unfinished. Not impossible. Simply incomplete. Every anniversary, he reread the witness interviews. Every anniversary, he circled the same page. One interview. One statement. One detail everyone ignored because it seemed too ordinary. A delivery driver named Walter Briggs told investigators he saw Sarah's blue sedan parked near the abandoned Ash Creek Bridge shortly after 7 that evening. Police checked the bridge repeatedly. They found nothing. Investigators assumed Walter had confused the date. The statement remained in the file, untouched, ignored. Years passed. Technology improved. DNA solved impossible murders. Fingerprint databases expanded. Old evidence found new life. Yet Sarah's disappearance remained frozen in time. Then Detective Grayson retired. Colleagues shook his hand, presented him with a plaque, closed his office. Life moved on. His notebooks moved into cardboard boxes stacked inside a dusty garage. For 15 years they remained there, until one rainy afternoon. Grayson was cleaning shelves when one notebook slipped from the stack. Loose papers scattered across the concrete floor. As he gathered them, one sketch caught his attention. Ash Creek Bridge. Not the bridge itself. The hills surrounding it. He stared at the drawing. His younger self had circled an old service road almost hidden by trees. Next to it he had written, "Road blocked after flood. Verify witness position." He frowned. He remembered the flood. County workers closed one entrance months before Sarah disappeared, which meant Walter Briggs could not have been where investigators believed he was. If Walter truly saw the blue sedan, he had been standing somewhere else entirely. Grayson unfolded the original map, measured distances, compared road closures. For the first time in 40 years, the witness statement made sense. Walter had not been looking toward Ash Creek Bridge. He had been looking toward the abandoned Miller Quarry. No detective had ever searched there. Not once. The realization stole his breath. 43 years. thousands of investigative hours, hundreds of interviews, dozens of search warrants, and an entire investigation may have been built around one incorrect assumption about where a witness had been standing. The next morning, Grayson drove to the sheriff's office carrying 3 notebooks under his arm. Most deputies knew him only as a retired detective whose photograph still hung in the hallway. Sheriff Elena Brooks listened quietly while Grayson explained the map. No dramatic speech, no grand theory, just measurements, road records, old weather reports, and one overlooked mistake. She agreed to reopen the location analysis, not because she believed the case was solved, because the evidence deserved one last honest look. 2 days later, drones flew above the overgrown Miller Quarry. Ground-penetrating radar swept terrain untouched since the early 1980s. Investigators expected nothing. Instead, the radar detected a large metallic object buried beneath decades of collapsed earth near the edge of the flooded quarry road. The object measured roughly the size of a passenger vehicle. Silence settled across the command post. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Grayson simply stared at the monitor. 43 years of frustration narrowed into one impossible image beneath layers of soil and stone. If the radar was correct, then Sarah Whitmore had never disappeared from Black Ridge County. She had been waiting there all along, and somewhere beyond a buried vehicle. The truth that had escaped an entire generation of investigators was finally beginning to surface. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The radar image changed the atmosphere at the command post instantly. No one celebrated. Experienced investigators knew better. Ground-penetrating radar could detect abandoned machinery, farm equipment, collapsed storage tanks, or countless other objects hidden beneath decades of earth. Hope had ruined investigations before. Hope made people see answers where none existed. Sheriff Elena Brooks ordered the area secured. No heavy equipment. No unnecessary movement. Everything would be documented exactly as if the disappearance had happened yesterday. News of the discovery spread through Black Ridge County before sunset. Within hours, television vans lined the entrance to the old quarry road. Residents gathered behind police tape despite the freezing wind. Many had been children when Sarah Whitmore disappeared. Others remembered joining volunteer searches in 1981. Some still carried faded newspaper clippings folded inside family photo albums. Everyone asked the same question. Could this finally be the end? Detective Thomas Grayson stayed away from the cameras. He stood alone beneath a line of leafless oak trees overlooking the excavation site. For 43 years, he had imagined hundreds of different endings. None of them felt real anymore. The excavation began the following morning. Layer after layer of compacted soil was removed by hand. Forensic archaeologists worked slowly, photographing every inch before touching anything. The process took hours. Then an investigator stopped digging. A section of faded blue paint had appeared beneath the earth. No one spoke. Grayson recognized the color immediately. It matched the photographs taken outside Black Ridge High School in January of 1981. Sarah Whitmore's sedan had been blue, exactly that shade. More soil disappeared. A chrome bumper emerged, then a cracked headlight. The front of a small sedan slowly returned to daylight after more than 4 decades underground. The license plate was still attached. The numbers were barely visible beneath rust, but they matched the registration in Sarah Whitmore's file. The car had been found. An entire generation of investigators had searched rivers, forests, caves, abandoned barns, and neighboring counties. All the while, the vehicle rested less than 6 miles from town, hidden beneath a landslide that occurred months after Sarah vanished. The discovery stunned everyone, but it immediately created another question. If the car had remained here all along, why had no one found it? Geologists supplied the answer. County records showed that a severe spring storm struck the quarry less than 3 months after Sarah disappeared. Thousands of tons of loose rock collapsed from the eastern wall. The slide buried the access road completely. What had once been visible became part of the landscape. Trees eventually grew over the debris. Nature had erased the scene long before investigators realized they were searching the wrong location. As the excavation continued, forensic specialists carefully opened the driver's door. The interior was remarkably intact considering its age. The ignition key remained in place. Sarah's leather handbag rested on the passenger seat. Her reading glasses lay on the dashboard. A history textbook sat in the back seat beside a stack of ungraded exams. The sight hit everyone harder than expected. It looked as though someone had simply stepped away for a moment, frozen in time, waiting to continue a journey interrupted 43 years earlier. But Sarah was not inside the vehicle. Investigators searched every inch of the cabin. Nothing. No remains. No signs of violence. No obvious explanation. The mystery had changed. The missing car was no longer missing. Only Sarah was. Forensic technicians began cataloging every item inside the sedan. Most appeared ordinary. Receipts, pens, cassette tapes, winter gloves. Then one technician noticed something unusual beneath the driver's seat. A small portable cassette recorder. Its plastic casing was cracked. Its batteries had long since corroded, but a tape remained inside. Evidence technician Rachel Kim carefully removed it using gloves. The label contained only 2 handwritten words. Monday night. No date. No explanation. The recorder was sealed and transported immediately to the State Forensic Laboratory. While specialists worked on the tape, investigators examined the quarry itself. The old service road curved sharply around a steep rock wall before ending near an abandoned maintenance building. The building had collapsed years earlier. Its roof had disappeared. Its windows were gone. But one feature remained intact. A steel observation platform overlooking the quarry. Detective Grayson climbed the rusted staircase slowly. From the platform, the entire area became visible. The buried road. The recovered sedan. The entrance Walter Briggs would have seen from the highway. For the first time since 1981, Grayson understood the witness statement perfectly. Walter had never been looking toward Ash Creek Bridge. He had been looking directly at the quarry road. His memory had been correct. The investigation had interpreted it incorrectly. One small mistake. 43 years of consequences. Later that afternoon, another discovery was made. Search teams found fresh damage on an old guardrail, preserved beneath layers of collapsed earth. The metal was bent outward. Paint fragments still clung to the steel despite decades underground. Laboratory analysis later confirmed they matched Sarah's vehicle. The evidence suggested the sedan had struck the guardrail before leaving the roadway. But something still refused to make sense. The angle was wrong. According to accident reconstruction specialists, the damage was inconsistent with a driver accidentally losing control on ice. The impact suggested the car changed direction suddenly, almost violently, as if Sarah had attempted to avoid something in front of her, or someone. The possibility transformed the investigation once again. Sheriff Brooks requested every surviving witness from 1981 be interviewed. Many were now in their 70s or 80s. Some struggled to remember details. Others surprised investigators with astonishing clarity. One name kept appearing: Daniel Mercer, a volunteer firefighter in 1981. Daniel had participated in the original search, but had never been considered an important witness. When detectives visited his home, he hesitated before answering questions. Eventually, he admitted something he had never reported. On the night Sarah disappeared, he drove past quarry entrance shortly after 7 o'clock. He remembered seeing 2 vehicles: Sarah's blue sedan, and an unfamiliar dark pickup truck parked nearby with its headlights off. At the time, he assumed 2 motorists had stopped because of the icy roads. He continued driving. The next morning, Sarah was missing. Daniel thought about reporting the truck. Then he convinced himself it probably meant nothing. 43 years later, his voice trembled as he spoke. I kept telling myself someone else must have seen it. Nobody had. Investigators immediately searched old vehicle registration records. Thousands of pickup trucks had existed in Kentucky during 1981. The lead seemed impossible, until another forgotten document surfaced. Inside Detective Grayson's original notebook was a page folded twice. He had written only one sentence beside a partial license plate collected from an anonymous phone call. Ki bon moi bai, black pickup near quarry. The remaining numbers were smudged beyond recognition. Grayson closed his eyes. He remembered the call now. It arrived 3 days after Sarah disappeared. The caller refused to identify himself. He claimed a dark pickup had been parked near the quarry that evening. Without a complete plate number, investigators could do little. The tip slowly disappeared beneath newer leads. Now 2 independent witnesses described the same vehicle, separated by decades, connected by the same forgotten road. The cold case was no longer about a woman who vanished into thin air. It was becoming the story of a meeting that should never have happened. Somewhere inside the recovered sedan, inside the damaged guardrail, inside the decades-old cassette tape, waiting in a forensic laboratory, the next piece of the truth was still hiding. And Detective Thomas Grayson could not escape one unsettling thought. He had been standing within sight of the answer 43 years earlier. He simply didn't know where to look. Fictional true crime story. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The discovery of Sarah Whitmore's abandoned sedan reopened a wound that Black Ridge County had spent decades trying to forget. For years, the town had accepted the possibility that Sarah had disappeared by choice. Some believed she left Kentucky. Some believed she started a new life somewhere far away. Some even believed she was never coming back. But the recovered vehicle destroyed those theories in a single afternoon. Sarah had not walked away. She had not vanished. She had been taken from the road. She traveled every day. And now investigators were facing the question that had haunted every cold case detective who touched the file. Who was waiting for her that night? The forensic examination of the sedan continued around the clock. Every object inside the vehicle was treated as a potential message from the past. The steering wheel, the door handles, the seats, the floor mats, even the smallest pieces of dirt trapped beneath the tires. 43 years had passed, but investigators knew one thing. Time does not always destroy evidence. Sometimes it preserves it. The first major discovery came from the driver's side door. A fingerprint was recovered from the inside handle. The print was incomplete, damaged by moisture, but modern technology allowed analysts to compare it against updated databases. The result came back 2 days later. No match. A dead end. But investigators were not discouraged, because the absence of a match created another possibility. The fingerprint did not belong to anyone in the system. It belonged to someone who had never been investigated, someone unknown. The second discovery came from the trunk. Inside was a small brown envelope. The paper had deteriorated. The ink had faded, but the contents remained readable. It contained 3 photographs, all taken at the same location, the old Black Ridge County Courthouse. The images showed people entering the building. At first glance, they seemed meaningless, random photographs. But Detective Grayson immediately recognized one person, Thomas Keller, a local businessman who had owned several properties around the county in 1981. He had never been connected to Sarah's disappearance. He was considered a respected member of the community, a person people trusted. But there was something strange. Sarah had never mentioned him in any interview, never listed him as a friend, never listed him as someone she knew. So why was she photographing him? Investigators dug deeper into Thomas Keller's history. They discovered that in 1980, he had purchased land near Miller Quarry, the same land where Sarah's car was eventually found. The property transfer appeared normal, until investigators found one unusual detail. The sale was completed less than 30 days after Sarah disappeared. And the previous owner? The county records clerk who processed the paperwork was Sarah Whitmore's former history teacher, a man named Harold Vance. The connections began forming, slowly, carefully, like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for decades. Sarah had not been investigating random events. She had been following something involving land, money, and people who had influence in Black Ridge County. The recovered cassette tape became the next major breakthrough. After days of restoration, forensic audio specialists managed to extract the recording. The first seconds contained only static. Then came a sound, a car engine, wind, a door closing, and finally Sarah's voice. Quiet, controlled, but clearly afraid. Investigators stopped everything when they heard her speak. For 43 years, Sarah Whitmore had been silent. Now her voice returned from the past. The recording was short, only 6 minutes. But those 6 minutes changed the case forever. Sarah was speaking to someone, a man. His voice was calm, almost familiar. The conversation was difficult to understand, but several phrases were clear. You said this would stay buried. A pause. Then Sarah said, I know what happened. The male voice responded, You don't understand what you're involved in. Another pause. Then Sarah, I understand enough. The recording ended with a sudden noise, a struggle. The device hit the ground, and then silence. Nobody in the room spoke after the tape stopped, because they finally knew Sarah Whitmore had not disappeared randomly. She had discovered something serious enough that someone wanted to stop her. But the recording raised another question. Who was the man speaking to her? Audio experts attempted voice comparison, but the recording quality was too poor. The voice could not be identified with certainty. Investigators needed more. They returned to Sarah's life before the disappearance. They examined her school records, her financial history, her personal relationships. They discovered that in the months before she vanished, Sarah had become increasingly interested in local property disputes. She had been researching historical land ownership for a school project. At least, that was what she told people. But hidden among her papers was a different file, a folder labeled Black Ridge Archive. Inside were copies of old property documents, newspaper articles, handwritten notes, and a list of names. At the top of the list was Thomas Keller. Below him were several other influential residents. The final name shocked investigators. Harold Vance, Sarah's former teacher, the same man who had processed the property documents, the same man connected to the land near the quarry, the same man who had never mentioned Sarah's investigation. When detectives located Harold Vance, he was 84 years old. He lived quietly outside the county. When asked about Sarah, his expression changed immediately. He claimed he barely remembered her. But investigators noticed something. A framed photograph on his bookshelf. A photograph of Black Ridge High School, taken in 1981. Sarah Whitmore was standing in the background. Harold claimed he kept it because he saved all school memories. But investigators found another detail. Written on the back of the photograph were 5 words. She knew about the land. Harold refused to explain. For the first time in 43 years, investigators had a direct connection between Sarah and the people connected to the quarry. But the deeper they searched, the more complicated the story became. Because the evidence suggested Sarah was not investigating a murder. She was investigating something that happened before the night she disappeared. Something involving stolen property, hidden agreements, and a secret that powerful people had protected for decades. Detective Grayson returned home that night, unable to sleep. He opened his old notebook again, the same notebook that started everything. Near the back was another forgotten page, a note he had written after interviewing Sarah's sister in 1981. One sentence stood out. Sarah was afraid of someone, but she wouldn't say who. For 43 years, Grayson had interpreted that sentence differently. He thought Sarah was afraid because she was in danger. Now he understood. She was afraid because she knew exactly who she was investigating. And whoever that person was had spent 4 decades believing the truth was buried forever. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The investigation into Sarah Whitmore's disappearance had changed completely. What began as a missing person case had become something far more dangerous. A hidden network of secrets, A chain of decisions made by people who believed they could control the truth forever. And at the center of it all was one question. What did Sarah discover before she disappeared? The answer appeared to be connected to land. But investigators quickly learned that land was only the surface. The deeper they went, the more they uncovered a story about power, influence, and a group of people who had spent decades protecting one another. Detectives returned to the courthouse archives, the same place where Sarah had photographed Thomas Keller entering the building, the same place where property records had been altered, the same place where she believed something was hidden. The archive room had changed dramatically since 1981. Computers had replaced paper files. Old documents had been moved into storage. But one thing remained: the original records. Thousands of pages stored in boxes that had not been opened for years. Forensic document specialists began comparing property transfers from the late 1970s and early 1980s. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then they found a pattern. Several rural properties near Miller Quarry had changed ownership under strange circumstances. Owners sold land at prices far below market value. Some documents were signed within hours of each other. Some witnesses claimed they never appeared before a notary. The names kept appearing: Thomas Keller, Harold Vance, and another name investigators had not previously considered: Richard Bell. In 1981, Richard Bell was a county sheriff, a respected law enforcement official, the person responsible for overseeing the original search for Sarah Whitmore. The discovery stunned investigators. The man leading the investigation had a possible connection to the very secret Sarah was trying to expose. Detective Grayson immediately reviewed the original case files. For the first time, he looked at his own investigation with suspicion, not because he believed he had ignored evidence, because he wondered if someone had influenced what evidence was available. The original search records showed something unusual. A search team had planned to examine Miller Quarry 3 days after Sarah disappeared, but the search was canceled. The reason listed in the report? Insafe terrain. However, weather records from that week showed the conditions were manageable. The quarry had not been considered too dangerous. Someone had decided not to search there, and that decision had never been explained. Grayson stared at the document for several minutes. 43 years earlier, he had trusted the information given to him. Now he wondered who had controlled that information. The investigation moved toward Richard Bell, but finding answers would not be easy. Richard had died in 2003. His records were limited. His personal files had disappeared. His family refused interviews. But investigators discovered one surviving witness, a former dispatcher named Linda Morris. In 1981, Linda was 22 years old. She worked overnight shifts at the sheriff's office. She remembered the night Sarah disappeared. She remembered the phone calls, the search orders, the confusion. In one conversation she never forgot, Linda told investigators that shortly after Sarah was reported missing, Sheriff Bell received a private phone call. After the call ended, his behavior changed. He immediately ordered deputies to focus searches away from Miller Quarry. When Linda asked why, Bell told her, "Because that's not where we need to look." At the time, she assumed he knew something. She trusted him. Years later, she realized something different. He may have been directing them away from the truth. Linda also revealed another detail. The night Sarah disappeared, a second call came into station. A man reported seeing Sarah's car near the quarry. The call was never entered into the official log. Linda remembered writing it down on a piece of paper. That paper disappeared. The discovery created a major breakthrough. For decades, investigators believed only one witness had seen Sarah near the quarry, Walter Briggs. Now, they knew there had been another, someone whose information had been removed. The question became, who deleted the call? And why? Investigators searched through archive phone records. Most were destroyed, but one remained. A billing record from the local telephone company. It showed a call placed at the sheriff's office at 7:18 p.m. on January 12, 1981. The caller's number belonged to a private residence. A residence owned by Thomas Keller. The man Sarah had been photographing, the man connected to the quarry property, the man whose name appeared repeatedly in the hidden documents. Investigators visited the old Keller property. The house had changed owners several times, but the current owner allowed them to search a storage building behind the home. Inside, they found boxes left behind by previous residents. Most contained ordinary household items. Then they found a locked metal container. Inside were old business records, bank statements, property agreements, and a photograph. A photograph showing 3 men standing outside Miller Quarry: Thomas Keller, Harold Vance, and Richard Bell. The date on the back was January 5th, 1981, 1 week before Sarah disappeared. The discovery was explosive. It proved the 3 men had a connection, but it did not prove they were responsible. Investigators still needed to understand what Sarah had found. The answer came from a document hidden beneath the business records, a contract, an agreement involving the purchase of quarry land. But the names on the document were not the same as the names on official records. The contract showed that several residents had been pressured into selling their properties. Some claimed they were threatened. Some claimed they were misled. The land was then transferred through multiple companies before being purchased by Thomas Keller, a classic method used to hide ownership. Sarah had discovered a land scheme, but why would that lead to her disappearance? The answer appeared in a handwritten note attached to the contract. Only 4 words. Original survey is missing. Investigators searched historical records again. They found references to an old geological survey conducted in 1979, a survey that showed valuable mineral deposits beneath the land. If true, the property near Miller Quarry was worth millions, but the survey had disappeared, and Sarah had been looking for it. The case was no longer about a missing teacher. It was about a secret worth millions of dollars, a secret powerful enough to destroy careers, a secret powerful enough to make someone disappear. Then, investigators received another unexpected call. An elderly man claimed he knew where the missing survey was. He said he had been waiting decades to reveal it. His name was Frank Dalton. In 1981, he worked as a survey assistant. He had helped create the original documents, and he claimed Sarah Whitmore was not the first person to uncover the truth. She was simply the last person brave enough to expose it. Before meeting investigators, Frank delivered one warning: be careful who you trust. The people who buried this secret didn't disappear with it. And for the first time in 43 years, the investigators realized something terrifying. The person responsible for Sarah's disappearance may not have been hiding from the case. They may have been watching it the entire time. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The words from Frank Dalton changed the direction of the investigation. The people who buried this secret didn't disappear with it. Those words stayed with every detective who heard them, because they suggested something investigators had not fully considered. The person responsible for Sarah Whitmore's disappearance may have spent decades living among the people searching for answers, not running, not hiding, watching. The meeting with Frank Dalton was arranged at a quiet diner outside Black Ridge County. He arrived early. He sat alone in the corner booth. A cup of untouched coffee rested in front of him. At 87 years old, Frank looked fragile, but his memory was sharp. He remembered dates, names, conversations, details that most people would have forgotten after 40 years. When investigators asked why he waited so long, Frank looked toward the window. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he answered, "Because I thought telling the truth would get someone else hurt." That sentence revealed the fear that had controlled Black Ridge County for decades. People did not remain silent because they believed nothing happened. They remained silent because they believed speaking would cost them everything. Frank explained that in 1979, he worked as an assistant on a geological survey team. The county had hired them to study the land around Miller Quarry. At first, it appeared to be a routine project. Measurements, soil samples, environmental reports. But during testing, the team discovered something unexpected. The The land contained valuable mineral deposits, a discovery that could transform the entire county. Millions of dollars, new businesses, new jobs, a complete economic change. But there was a problem. The people who owned the land did not know its true value, and someone realized an opportunity. According to Frank, Thomas Keller, Richard Bell, and Harold Vance began purchasing properties quietly. They created companies, used intermediaries, moved documents. They made sure the original owners never understood what they were selling. Frank discovered the plan when he noticed inconsistencies in the official reports. Numbers had been changed. Pages were missing. Survey results had been altered. He confronted Harold Vance. The response was not anger. It was a warning. Harold told him some things were better left alone. Frank remembered the exact words. You can lose your job for asking questions. You can lose much more for finding answers. Frank said he wanted to report everything, but then his family began receiving anonymous warnings. His truck tires were damaged. His house was watched. Nothing violent. Nothing that could be proven. Just enough to make him afraid. He eventually left the county. But before leaving, he made copies of the original survey. Copies that Sarah Whitmore eventually discovered. Investigators leaned forward when they heard that. Sarah had not discovered the secret by accident. Someone had led her toward it. The question was who. Frank explained that after he left Kentucky, he mailed the copies to someone he trusted, a person who believed the truth should eventually come out. That person was Sarah's former history professor, Harold Vance. The same man, later connected to the land documents. The same man whose name appeared in Sarah's files. Investigators immediately noticed the contradiction. Why would Harold give Sarah evidence if he was part of the conspiracy? Frank had an answer. Because Harold was afraid. According to Frank, Harold had not started the scheme. He had helped hide it. But years later, he regretted his involvement. He wanted someone else to expose the truth. Someone who had credibility. Someone people would believe. Sarah was that person. She was respected. She was determined. And she was not afraid to challenge powerful people. But that made her dangerous. The investigation returned to Sarah's final weeks. Her co-workers described changes in her behavior. She seemed distracted. She stayed late at school. She made unusual phone calls. She began keeping notes. One teacher remembered asking Sarah if everything was okay. Sarah smiled and said, "Sometimes history repeats itself because nobody wants to admit what happened the first time." At the time, nobody understood what she meant. Now they did. Sarah was not just researching history. She was documenting the present. The recovered evidence showed that Sarah planned to expose the land scheme publicly. She had arranged a meeting with a newspaper reporter. She had prepared copies of documents. She had recorded conversations. She knew the people involved had influence, but she believed the truth would protect her. She was wrong. The next breakthrough came from the cassette recording. Audio specialists continued enhancing the damage tape. After weeks of work, they isolated a phrase previously buried beneath static. The male voice said, "Sarah, you don't understand what happens when people lose everything." Then Sarah responded, "People already lost everything. You just made sure nobody knew." Investigators believed those words represented the entire conflict. One side protecting wealth, the other side demanding accountability. The voice comparison still could not provide a confirmed identity, but investigators now had enough information to narrow the possibilities. They compared the voice to surviving recordings from the three main suspects: Thomas Keller, Harold Vance, Richard Bell. Thomas Keller was eliminated. The voice patterns did not match. Richard Bell was difficult to test because no recordings existed, but Harold Vance became the focus. The similarity was not enough for an arrest, but it was enough to reopen every question. When investigators searched Harold Vance's former property, they found something unexpected: a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of an old office. Inside were dozens of letters. Many were never sent. Most were apologies. Harold wrote about regret, fear, and the choices he wished he could undo. One letter mentioned Sarah directly. The date was January 10th, 1981, 2 days before her disappearance. It read, "Sarah knows about the documents. She wants to make everything public. I warned her to stop. I don't know if she listened." The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. For decades, Harold Vance had presented himself as a grieving former teacher, someone who lost a former student. Now investigators had evidence that he knew Sarah was in danger. But there was another line in the letter, a line that changed everything. "I am not the only one she confronted." Investigators stopped reading, because those words meant Harold was not acting alone. Someone else was involved. Someone Sarah had met after discovering the land documents. Someone who may have been responsible for what happened at Miller Quarry. The investigation moved again, back to the final night, back to the quarry road, back to the unknown pickup truck, because now detectives understood something. Sarah did not disappear because she found a secret. She disappeared because she tried to reveal it. And whoever stopped her had spent 43 years believing they had succeeded. But they had made one mistake. They forgot about the detective who never stopped looking. They forgot about the witnesses who still remembered. And they forgot that buried evidence does not mean destroyed evidence. Sometimes, it is simply waiting for the right person to uncover it. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The discovery of Harold Vance's hidden letters changed everything. For 43 years, investigators had searched the person who made Sarah Whitmore disappear. Now they were finally understanding something far more disturbing. The disappearance was never a random act. It was a final move in a plan that had been unfolding for years. Sarah had not stumbled into danger. She had walked directly into a secret protected by people who believed they were untouchable. But the new evidence created a problem. Harold Vance was clearly connected. He knew Sarah had uncovered the documents. He knew she intended to expose the land scheme. He admitted warning her. But was he responsible for her disappearance? Or was he another person trapped inside the same web of fear? Investigators needed answers. And they needed them quickly, because another discovery had appeared inside Harold's letters. A name. One name repeated several times. Not Thomas Keller. Not Richard Bell. Someone else. A man named Victor Hale. In 1981, Victor Hale was a private security contractor who worked for several wealthy landowners in Kentucky. He had no official connection to the quarry project, at least none that appeared in public records. But investigators found something interesting. Victor's company received payments from businesses connected to Thomas Keller during the months before Sarah disappeared. The payments were labeled as Property Protection Services. Avoir description, a convenient description. When detectives searched deeper, they discovered Victor had been hired to monitor land disputes, including disputes involving Miller Quarry, the same location where Sarah's vehicle was found, the same location where she recorded her final conversation. The investigation shifted toward Victor Hale. But there was one problem. Victor Hale had disappeared himself. Not in 1981. Not after Sarah's disappearance. Years later. In 1997, he left Kentucky without explanation. No forwarding address. No public records. No contact with former employees. It was as if he had erased himself. Detectives began reconstructing Victor's life. They discovered that before leaving Kentucky, he had attempted to sell personal belongings. Among those items was an old pickup truck, a black 1978 Chevrolet, the same type of vehicle described by witness Daniel Mercer, the same type of vehicle seen near the quarry the night Sarah disappeared. Investigators searched vehicle records. The truck had been sold several times. Eventually, it was registered in another state. But the ownership history contained one strange gap. The period between 1981 and 1983 was missing. 2 years. No records. No explanation. Exactly the time investigators needed to understand. Detective Grayson returned to his old notes again, the habit that followed him for decades, searching through forgotten pages. looking for the detail everyone ignored. Near the middle of his original investigation journal, he found something. A statement from a gas station attendant, a man named Eddie Collins. In 1981, Eddie worked at a small gas station near the highway leading to Miller Quarry. He reported seeing a black pickup truck stop for fuel the night Sarah disappeared. The driver was nervous. The truck had damage on the front passenger side. The detail was dismissed. Investigators believed it was unrelated. Now it mattered, because the recovered sedan showed impact damage on the same side. The vehicle that hit Sarah's car may have left with matching damage. The evidence was beginning to form a timeline. At 6:42 p.m., Sarah left the school. Around 7 p.m., she reached Miller Quarry Road. A conversation began. Something went wrong. Her car struck the guardrail. Then the vehicle was moved, hidden, and someone spent the next 43 years hoping nobody would find it. The question became, why did Sarah go there? The answer was discovered inside her personal journal, a journal that had been returned to her family after the investigation. At the time, nobody realized one page had been removed. Modern forensic examination revealed the missing page had left impressions on the pages beneath it. Using specialized imaging technology, analysts recovered the writing. The hidden message was short, but it changed the case. Sarah had written, "Meeting tonight. He says he has proof. If true, everything changes." Investigators froze. He. Not they, not a group, one person. Someone Sarah trusted enough to meet alone. Someone who claimed to have proof. The question was no longer who Sarah confronted. It was who called her there. The answer came from an old phone record, a call placed to Sarah's home 2 hours before she disappeared. The number belonged to a payphone outside the Black Ridge County Courthouse, a location used frequently by people who wanted privacy. The call lasted 7 minutes. The identity of the caller was never recorded, but investigators found one person who had access to that phone regularly: Harold Vance, the former teacher, the man who admitted warning Sarah, the man whose letters showed fear, the man who claimed he wanted to help. When detectives questioned Harold again, he finally broke. For the first time, the 84-year-old former teacher stopped denying his involvement. He admitted contacting Sarah. He admitted asking her to meet. He admitted giving her information about the land scheme, but he denied killing her. His explanation was complicated. He said he wanted Sarah to expose the truth, but he also wanted to control how it happened. He feared what would happen if the wrong people learned she had evidence. Harold told investigators that on the night Sarah disappeared, he followed her to Miller Quarry. He claimed he wanted to make sure she was safe. But when he arrived, she was already gone. Her car was there. The black pickup was there. And Victor Hale was standing nearby. Harold said he saw Victor arguing with Sarah. He heard shouting. He saw Sarah holding documents. Then he left. He was afraid. Detectives asked the question that mattered most. Why didn't you call police? Harold looked down. His answer explained 43 years of silence. Because I knew exactly who they would believe. The statement revealed the power imbalance that shaped the entire case. Harold believed the system was controlled. He believed the truth would be buried. And instead of fighting, he chose survival. But investigators still needed proof. A confession was not enough. They needed evidence connecting Victor Hale to Sarah's disappearance. That evidence arrived from an unexpected source. A storage facility in Tennessee. After Victor disappeared in 1997, he abandoned several rented units. Inside one of them, investigators found boxes containing old security records, photographs, maps, payment records, and one envelope labeled Whitmore. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah Carter? No, Sarah Whitmore, standing beside the Miller Quarry sign, taken the day before she disappeared. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note, 6 words. She knows too much now. For the first time in 43 years, investigators had evidence that someone had been watching Sarah before she vanished. Someone had been tracking her movements. Someone had been preparing. And now the cold case that had remained frozen for generations was moving faster than anyone expected. Because a final clue from a retired detective had opened a door. And behind that door was a truth far darker than anyone in Black Ridge County imagined. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The photograph found inside Victor Hale's abandoned storage unit became the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation, not because it proved what happened to Sarah Whitmore, but because it proved something investigators had suspected for weeks. Sarah was not simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was being watched. Someone knew what she was investigating. Someone knew where she was going. Someone knew exactly how dangerous her discovery had become. For 43 years, the people of Black Ridge County believed Sarah vanished during a moment of chaos. Now investigators were seeing a different picture, a planned confrontation, a hidden meeting, and a secret that had been protected by more than one person. The photograph was analyzed by forensic specialists. The date was confirmed. The location was confirmed. And the person who took the photograph was identified through digital enhancement. A reflection in the vehicle window showed the photographer standing several feet away. The image was not clear enough to identify a face, but it revealed something else. The photographer was standing beside a black pickup truck, a truck matching the description given by witnesses in 1981. The same vehicle connected to Victor Hale, the same vehicle seen near Miller Quarry. The investigation moved from suspicion to urgency. Federal investigators were contacted. Search warrants were issued. Every remaining record connected to Victor Hale was examined. And slowly, a hidden history began to emerge. Victor Hale had not been a random security contractor. He had worked for powerful clients across Kentucky. His job was simple: protect property, protect investments, protect information. But investigators discovered that his work often involved more than security. He monitored people. He collected information. He documented conflicts. He created files. And one of those files was about Sarah Whitmore. Inside Victor's records were pages of observations, her daily routine, her work schedule, the places she visited, the people she contacted, every movement documented. The discovery shocked investigators because it proved the threat Sarah faced was much larger than anyone understood. She was not only investigating a secret, she had become the subject of an investigation herself. Detective Grayson read through the documents quietly. He had spent most of his career believing he had failed Sarah. Now, he realized something worse. The people responsible had been several steps ahead from the beginning. They were watching the investigation. They knew what police knew. They knew what witnesses said. They knew where detectives searched. And they used that knowledge to stay ahead. The original investigation had not simply gone cold. It had been manipulated. The evidence pointed toward a carefully controlled operation. But one question remained. What happened during Sarah's final conversation? The restored cassette tape provided another answer. Audio experts returned to the damaged recording. Using advanced restoration techniques, they separated layers of sound. A second conversation hidden beneath the original recording was discovered. A few seconds only, but enough. Sarah's voice could be heard. She was not alone. A man spoke. Then another voice appeared. A second male voice. The discovery changed everything. There had not been one person at Miller Quarry. There had been at least two. Investigators compared the voices. The first voice was believed to be Harold Vance. The second remained unidentified, but the tone was familiar, aggressive, confident. Someone who believed he controlled the situation. Investigators believed the second voice belonged to Victor Hale. The conversation revealed a confrontation. Sarah demanded answers. The men demanded the documents. Then Sarah said something that became the most important sentence on the recording. You don't get to erase people. The sentence stayed with everyone involved in the case because it explained who Sarah was. She was not chasing money. She was not trying to destroy anyone. She was fighting against the idea that powerful people could decide whose stories mattered. The forensic team discovered another important detail. The recording contained the sound of a third object, a vehicle door, opening, then closing. A few seconds later, the sound of an engine. Investigators compared the audio with the recovered vehicle. The sound matched Sarah's sedan, but there was another engine, a larger one, a truck, the same type of truck witnesses remembered. The timeline became clearer. Sarah arrived at Miller Quarry. She met Harold Vance. Victor Hale was already there. An argument followed. The vehicles moved, and then Sarah disappeared. But investigators still needed to know where she went. The answer came from an unexpected source. A former construction worker named Carl Jennings contacted police after seeing the news reports. In 1981, Carl worked near Miller Quarry. He remembered something he had never reported. The morning after Sarah disappeared, he saw fresh tire tracks leading away from the quarry road. 2 sets. One from a sedan, one from a truck. He assumed police already knew, so he said nothing. For 43 years, he carried that memory. When detectives asked why he finally spoke, he answered, "Because I realized everyone thought someone else had the answer." That sentence described the entire case. Everyone waited. Everyone assumed. Everyone believed another person knew more, and the truth remained buried. Investigators returned to the quarry with the new information. They searched areas surrounding the original discovery site. Within hours, they found something hidden beneath a layer of rock, a metal box, rust-covered, damaged, but intact. Inside were documents, photographs, and a small handwritten journal. The journal belonged to Victor Hale. The first pages contained ordinary security notes. Then the entries changed. They became personal, obsessive. They documented Sarah's investigation. They documented conversations. They documented the night she disappeared. One entry, dated January 12, 1981, contained only one sentence. She refuses to stop. The next entry was written several days later. Problem handled. Investigators stared at those words. 2 words. For decades of mystery. A statement that suggested Victor Hale knew exactly what happened. But the final page created an even bigger shock. Because Victor did not write that he acted alone. He wrote a name. A name investigators had never expected. A name that changed the entire investigation. Richard Bell, the former sheriff. The man who controlled the original search. The man who directed investigators away from Miller Quarry. The man who died believing the secret would never be uncovered. Suddenly, the case was no longer about one missing woman. It was about a conspiracy that reached inside law enforcement itself. The retired detective's final clue had opened the door, but behind that door was an entire history of deception. And now investigators faced the most difficult question of all. How many people had known the truth in 1981? And how many had chosen to let Sarah Whitmore disappear? The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The name Richard Bell changed everything. For decades, his name had represented authority in Black Ridge County, a sheriff, a public servant. The man whose photograph hung inside the courthouse hallway for years after his retirement. To the community, Richard Bell was remembered as a steady presence during difficult times. But the evidence uncovered inside Victor Hale's hidden journal painted a completely different picture. A man who was not protecting the truth. A man who may have been protecting the people who buried it. The investigation immediately turned toward the original case files. Every report, every interview, every search order, every decision made during the first 72 hours after Sarah Whitmore disappeared. Detectives began reviewing the investigation as if they were examining someone else's work, not because they wanted to blame the past, because they needed to understand how the truth had remained hidden for so long. The first problem appeared in the search records. On January 13, 1981, Deputies searched more than 20 locations, fields, roads, abandoned buildings, riverbanks. But Miller Quarry was missing from the official list. A location mentioned by multiple witnesses. A location connected to Sarah's final known movement. A location that was never searched. The reason written in the report was simple. No evidence suggests the subject traveled in that direction. But investigators now knew that statement was false. Evidence did suggest it. Witnesses had said it. A phone call had said it. A damaged vehicle would eventually prove it. Someone had removed that possibility before the search even began, and the person responsible had the authority to make that decision. Richard Bell, the former sheriff, was dead. He could not answer questions. He could not defend himself. But his actions remained inside the records. And records do not forget. Investigators reconstructed the final weeks before Sarah disappeared. They discovered that Richard Bell had attended several private meetings with Thomas Keller and Harold Vance. Officially, those meetings involved county development projects. Unofficially, they involved the land around Miller Quarry, the same land containing valuable mineral deposits, the same land that Sarah was investigating, the same land where she vanished. The connection became impossible to ignore, but investigators still needed the missing piece. Why would Sarah trust Harold Vance? Why would she meet him? Why would she bring evidence to someone connected to the people she was investigating? The answer came from a letter found among Sarah's personal belongings. A letter she never sent. It was addressed to Harold. In it, Sarah wrote, "I believe you are afraid, but I don't believe you are beyond saving." The sentence revealed something important. Sarah did not see Harold as an enemy. She saw him as someone who knew the truth, someone who could help expose it. But the letter continued. "If you're asking me to stop, I need to know why." That sentence suggested Harold had already warned her. He knew something dangerous was coming, but he never told her everything. The investigators questioned Harold Vance again. This time, the conversation was different. He was no longer hiding behind memory loss, no longer pretending he barely knew Sarah. He admitted more. He admitted that Richard Bell had pressured him to stay silent. He admitted Thomas Keller had threatened to destroy his career. And he admitted Victor Hale was hired because they feared Sarah would not stop. But when investigators asked the most important question, "Did you know Sarah would be killed?" Harold looked away. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Then he answered, "No." Another pause. "But I knew they were going to make sure she never spoke publicly." Those words became the turning point, because they changed the case from an accident or confrontation into something deliberate. Someone had planned to silence Sarah. The remaining evidence was sent to prosecutors. But one major obstacle remained. Victor Hale was gone. Richard Bell was dead. Thomas Keller had died years earlier. The three people believed to be central figures were no longer available to face justice. The investigation seemed trapped between the past and the present, until another discovery surfaced. A DNA profile. Inside the recovered sedan, forensic specialists had found biological material beneath the passenger seat. For decades, it had been impossible to analyze, but new technology allowed scientists to create a partial profile. The results shocked investigators. The DNA did not match Sarah. It did not match Harold. It did not match any known investigator. It belonged to an unknown male, a person who had been inside Sarah's vehicle. A person who was not supposed to be there. The sample was entered into national databases. Days passed, then weeks. No match. But investigators refused to stop. They began examining family connections. And eventually they found something. The DNA was connected to a living person, not directly, through a relative, a man named Caleb Hale, Victor Hale's nephew. Caleb had never been considered part of the investigation. He had been a teenager in 1981. He lived outside Kentucky. He had no criminal history, no connection to the quarry. At least, that was what everyone believed. When detectives interviewed Caleb, he immediately denied knowing anything. But his reaction changed when they mentioned the recovered DNA. He became silent. Then he asked one question. How much do you know? Investigators realized they had found something. Not a confession. Not yet, but fear. The same fear that had controlled Black Ridge County for decades. Caleb eventually admitted his uncle had told him stories about Sarah Whitmore. Stories he thought were exaggerated. Stories he believed were lies. But one detail bothered him. Before Victor disappeared in 1997, he gave Caleb a small envelope. He told him, "If anyone ever asks about Black Ridge, give them this." Caleb kept the envelope hidden for 26 years. He never opened it. Until now. Inside was a final piece of evidence. A handwritten statement from Victor Hale. Not a confession. A warning. Victor wrote, "Everyone thinks the sheriff was a mastermind. They are wrong. He was only protecting someone else." Investigators read the sentence repeatedly because it created a new mystery. Richard Bell was not the top of the chain. Thomas Keller was not the top of the chain. Victor Hale was not the top of the chain. Someone else had been controlling the operation. Someone whose identity had remained hidden. The final line of Victor's statement revealed the name. And when investigators saw it, the entire case changed again. Because the person named was someone nobody expected. Someone still alive. Someone who had spent 43 years watching the investigation from a distance. Someone who had never once appeared in the original case file. The cold case that began with one missing teacher had become something much larger. And the final secret of Black Ridge County was finally ready to surface. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The name inside Victor Hale's handwritten statement did not belong to a politician. It did not belong to another sheriff. It did not belong to a wealthy businessman. It belonged to a lawyer, Jonathan Mercer. For more than 50 years, Mercer had been one of the most respected attorneys in eastern Kentucky. He rarely appeared in newspapers. He avoided public attention. He never held elected office. Yet nearly every major property transaction in Black Ridge County during the late 1970s and early 1980s passed through his law office. His signature appeared everywhere. Land deeds, corporate filings, trust agreements. Quiet transactions that attracted little attention at the time. Investigators immediately began reconstructing Mercer's career. What they found was unsettling. Dozens of shell companies. Property transfers involving the same handful of names. Documents prepared within hours of one another. Businesses that existed only long enough to purchase land before quietly dissolving. The pattern stretched across years. Someone had carefully built a legal maze designed to hide the real ownership of the quarry property. And Jonathan Mercer had drawn every map. Unlike Richard Bell or Thomas Keller, Mercer was still alive, 91 years old, living in a private assisted care residence outside Louisville. His health was failing. His memory, according to his family, remained remarkably sharp. Detective Thomas Grayson insisted on attending the interview himself. 43 years had led to this moment. He was not about to let someone else ask the questions. Mercer received them without surprise. When Grayson entered the room carrying Sarah Whitmore's case file, the old lawyer looked at the worn cardboard folder for several seconds. Then he quietly said, "So, you finally found a car." Grayson stopped walking. Nobody outside the investigative team knew about several details that had not yet been released publicly. Mercer should not have known. Unless he already did. The room became silent. Sheriff Elena Brooks placed a recovered photograph on the table. Mercer studied it. No emotion crossed his face. Next came the restored journal. Victor Hale's handwritten statement. Then Sarah's photograph. The old lawyer leaned back slowly. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Finally, he whispered, "I wondered how long it would take." Grayson asked the question that had waited for decades. What happened to Sarah Whitmore? Mercer closed his eyes. When he answered, his voice sounded tired rather than defensive. She discovered the survey. No denial. No argument. Just a simple acknowledgement. He explained that Sarah had pieced together years of hidden land transactions. She understood the mineral survey had been altered. She realized local families had unknowingly sold valuable land for almost nothing. She intended to deliver every document to a Louisville newspaper. Mercer admitted that meeting would have destroyed everyone involved. Richard Bell, Thomas Keller, Harold Vance, Victor Hale, and himself. According to Mercer, the group decided to convince Sarah to abandon the investigation. Nothing more. Nothing violent. They believed they could scare her. They underestimated her. She refused. Mercer's hands trembled. She said people deserved the truth. The old lawyer stared toward the window. She wouldn't leave. Grayson leaned forward. What happened next? Mercer swallowed. Victor lost control. The room remained completely still. Mercer described the confrontation at Miller Quarry. Sarah arrived carrying copies of documents inside a leather folder. Harold begged her to wait. Richard argued that publishing the survey would destroy the county. Thomas Keller demanded the documents. Sarah refused. Victor Hale stepped forward. He attempted to grab the folder. Sarah pulled away. She hurried toward her car. Victor followed. A struggle began beside the driver's door. Sarah climbed inside. She started the engine. Victor reached through the open window, trying to stop her. The sedan accelerated. Victor jumped backward. Sarah swerved. The car struck the guardrail. Mercer said she was still alive after the impact. Dazed. Injured. Trying to restart the engine. Then panic took over. Nobody wanted police arriving. Nobody wanted questions. Nobody wanted the survey discovered. The decision that followed lasted only seconds, but its consequences lasted 43 years. They removed Sarah from a vehicle. They transported her away from the quarry. Mercer claimed he never saw her again. He insisted Victor Hale and Richard Bell drove away together. Whether Mercer was telling the complete truth remained uncertain. But for the first time, investigators possessed a first-hand account placing every major figure together on the night Sarah disappeared. Sheriff Brooks asked the question everyone feared. Where did they take her? Mercer slowly shook his head. I don't know. Grayson watched him carefully. The old detective had interviewed murderers, kidnappers, fraud artists. He knew deception. He also knew regret. Mercer did not look like a man inventing a story. He looked like someone exhausted by carrying it. Before in an interview, Mercer asked for one piece of paper. With trembling hands, he drew a rough map, an old forestry road, a creek crossing, a section of woodland never mentioned in the original investigation. He slid the map toward Grayson. I always believed. His voice cracked. They buried more than the truth out there. The search began the following morning. Cadaver dogs moved carefully through dense woodland that had changed dramatically since 1981. Old logging roads had disappeared beneath thick forest. Creeks had shifted course. Nature had rewritten the landscape, but Mercer's map matched historical aerial photographs almost perfectly. Near sunset, one dog stopped. Then another. Both alerted beside a shallow rise covered with mature oak trees. Forensic archaeologists began excavating. The work continued into the following day. Hours passed. Then fragments appeared. Weathered fabric. A rusted zipper. Pieces of deteriorated leather. Nearby investigators recovered a metal clasp. Rachel Kim compared it with photographs taken from Sarah Whitmore's family album. The clasp matched the leather document case Sarah carried on the night she disappeared. Everyone understood what that meant. They were standing where nobody had searched. Not once. 43 years earlier, the investigation had ended miles away. Now, guided by the final memories of an aging lawyer and the forgotten notes of a retired detective, they had reached the place where the last unanswered chapter waited beneath the soil. Detective Thomas Grayson stood quietly behind the excavation team. He looked across the forest. 43 winters. 43 springs. Thousands of mornings when the truth had remained hidden beneath fallen leaves and growing trees. He remembered the promise he made to Sarah's sister during the first week of the investigation. I won't stop looking. At the time, he believed those were comforting words. Now they had become something else. A promise finally approaching its end. The excavation continued as evening shadows stretched across the forest. No one spoke above a whisper. Every scrape of a trowel, every brush across the earth, every newly uncovered fragment carried the weight of 4 decades. And beneath that quiet Kentucky hillside, the past was finally beginning to answer back. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. Morning arrived beneath a gray Kentucky sky. The excavation site was silent except for the steady rhythm of brushes moving across damp earth. No reporters were allowed inside the perimeter. No television cameras. No helicopters. Sheriff Elena Brooks wanted the final chapter of Sarah Whitmore's story to begin with dignity rather than spectacle. Forensic anthropologists worked centimeter by centimeter. Every fragment of soil was screened. Every artifact photographed before it was touched. Just after noon, one investigator raised a gloved hand. The excavation stopped immediately. Partially exposed beneath decades of compacted soil lay a human wristwatch. Its leather band had almost disappeared. The glass face was cracked, but the hands remained frozen. 7:31. Detective Thomas Grayson recognized it instantly. 43 years earlier, Sarah's sister had described the watch in painful detail. It was a birthday gift from our father. She never took it off. Grayson closed his eyes. The watch had waited beneath the earth for more than 4 decades. It had kept its final time. Only its owner had been missing. The excavation continued with even greater care. Several feet away, investigators uncovered fragments of a wool coat, then a leather shoe, then a corroded key ring. Every discovery matched photographs taken before Sarah disappeared. By late afternoon, the forensic team reached the answer everyone had feared and hoped for at the same time. Human remains. The scene became completely silent. No celebration. No shouting. Only quiet respect. For Detective Grayson, the moment carried no sense of victory. Justice delayed for 43 years never feels like triumph. It feels like an apology that arrived too late. Sarah Whitmore had finally been found, less than 8 miles from the school where she taught history. Closer than anyone had imagined. The remains were transported to the State Forensic Laboratory. Scientists spent weeks completing the examination. Their findings confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Sarah had survived a collision at Miller Quarry. The crash had not killed her. The injuries were serious but treatable. The cause of death came later. A single blunt force injury to the back of the head, not accidental, not consistent with the vehicle impact. A homicide. The official manner of death finally changed after 43 years. Missing person. Cold case. Homicide solved. The words appeared together on the new investigative report. For many people inside Black Ridge County, seeing those words felt almost impossible. Generations had grown up believing the mystery would never end. Now it finally had. But one question remained unanswered. Who struck the fatal blow? Jonathan Mercer insisted it was Victor Hale. Harold Vance claimed he ran before the violence happened. Victor Hale had disappeared decades earlier. Richard Bell and Thomas Keller were dead. There was no living eyewitness willing to identify the killer until another forgotten piece of evidence surfaced. During the forensic examination of Sarah's recovered document case, technicians noticed something hidden between 2 layers of deteriorated leather, a folded sheet of notebook paper, protected from moisture by the lining, almost perfectly preserved. The handwriting belonged to Sarah. Investigators unfolded it carefully. It was not a diary entry. It was a statement, written only hours before the meeting. If anything happens to me, it means they chose silence over truth. Below that sentence, she listed 4 names. Thomas Keller, Richard Bell, Harold Vance, Victor Hale. No accusations, only names. Then one final sentence. I believe Victor is the most dangerous. The room remained silent. Sarah had identified the threat before she disappeared. She understood exactly who frightened her. The document became the strongest evidence yet connecting Victor Hale to the homicide. Prosecutors announced their conclusion weeks later. Although Victor Hale had died years earlier, investigators officially identified him as the person believed to have delivered the fatal attack. Richard Bell, Thomas Keller, Jonathan Mercer, and Harold Vance were identified as participants in a conspiracy to conceal the crime and obstruct the investigation. No courtroom would ever hear the case. Too much time had passed. Too many people were gone. But history would finally record what happened. For Sarah's family, that mattered. The county courthouse held a public meeting on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance. Hundreds of residents filled the room. Some remembered searching frozen fields in 1981. Others knew the case only through faded newspaper articles. Sheriff Brooks addressed the crowd quietly. For 43 years, this community asked where Sarah Whitmore was. She paused. Today we can finally answer that question. She did not describe the evidence. She did not describe the violence. Instead, she spoke about courage, about persistence, about the responsibility to keep asking difficult questions. Detective Thomas Grayson remained in the back of the room. He never approached the podium. He never accepted applause. When reporters asked whether he finally felt peace, he answered with the same honesty that had guided him throughout the investigation. No. The reporter looked surprised. Grayson continued. Peace would have meant bringing Sarah home in 1981. He looked towards Sarah's sister, sitting in the front row. What I feel is gratitude. Gratitude that she isn't waiting anymore. Months later, Black Ridge County quietly removed Richard Bell's portrait from the courthouse hallway. No ceremony. No announcement. Just an empty space on the wall. A reminder that reputation can survive for decades. But truth survives even longer. The abandoned Miller Quarry was permanently closed. A small memorial was placed near the entrance. No dramatic inscription, only a simple plaque. It read, in memory of Sarah Whitmore, whose search for truth outlived those who tried to bury it. Every January, fresh flowers appeared beneath the plaque. Nobody knew who left the first bouquet. Soon others followed. Teachers, former students, deputies, families whose own missing loved ones had never come home. The memorial became more than Sarah's. It became a place for every unanswered question, every forgotten investigation, every cold case still waiting. Detective Grayson visited only once. He stood alone beside the memorial as snow began falling across the quiet quarry road. 43 years earlier, he had arrived there believing the truth had disappeared. Now, he understood something very different. Truth does not disappear. People hide it. Time buries it. Fear protects it. But eventually, someone keeps asking questions long enough. Someone refuses to close a notebook. Someone notices the witness everyone ignored. Someone looks at an old map one more time. And sometimes, that is enough to bring an entire lifetime of silence to an end. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The courthouse emptied long before sunset. Television crews packed away their cameras. Reporters filed their final stories. The microphones disappeared. The headlines were written. For the rest of the country, the Sarah Whitmore investigation had become another remarkable cold case finally brought to an end. For Black Ridge County, the ending felt very different, because the people who lived there knew something outsiders never could. A solved case does not erase 43 years. It simply gives those years a name. Detective Thomas Grayson returned to his garage that evening carrying the same cardboard box that had changed everything. The notebooks were still inside. The faded maps. The photographs. The witness interviews. He placed them on the workbench one last time. For years, those pages represented failure. Now, they represented something else. Persistence. He slowly removed the first notebook he had written in during January of 1981. Its cover had almost separated from the binding. The corners were worn smooth. He opened to the very first page. Across the top, written in younger handwriting, were 4 words. Sarah Whitmore, missing female. Nothing more. No predictions. No Cities. Just 4 ordinary words. Grayson smiled quietly. He picked up a black marker. Beneath those words, he added another sentence. She came home. He closed a notebook, never to open it again. Across town, Sarah's sister Emily stood inside the old family house. Most of the furniture had remained untouched for decades. The hallway photographs, the grandfather clock, the wooden staircase that creaked in exactly the same place as it had in 1981. On the dining room table rested a cardboard box returned by investigators. Inside were Sarah's personal belongings, her wristwatch, her reading glasses, a silver bracelet, a ring. The small leather wallet recovered from the abandoned sedan. Emily lifted the watch carefully into her hands. The hands were still frozen at 7:31. She remembered giving that watch to Sarah after saving money from her first summer job. Back then it had seemed like such an ordinary gift. Now it had become the last object to accompany her sister through 43 missing years. Emily did not cry. She had already spent decades doing that. Instead, she whispered something almost too quietly to hear. I found you. That night, another unexpected visitor arrived at the sheriff's office, an elderly woman named Ruth Collins. She carried a small wooden box wrapped inside an old blanket. She explained that her late husband had worked for Thomas Keller during the early 1980s. Before his death, he told her one thing: if they ever solve Sarah's case, give them this. Sheriff Brooks opened the box. Inside rested dozens of old negatives, film negatives, every one carefully labeled with dates. The department immediately contacted forensic imaging specialists. Over the following week, technicians restored hundreds of photographs. Most showed routine construction work around Miller Quarry, road repairs, survey equipment, storage buildings. Then investigators discovered something extraordinary. One photograph had been taken on January 13th, 1981, the morning after Sarah disappeared. Workers stood near the quarry entrance. Behind them, almost hidden beneath fresh tire tracks, was Sarah's blue sedan, not buried, not destroyed, still sitting beside the access road. The timestamp proved something investigators had only suspected. The vehicle remained visible after Sarah disappeared, for at least several hours, which meant someone had deliberately prevented search teams from reaching the location before the spring landslide buried it forever. The image became the final confirmation that the original search had been intentionally redirected. History was rewritten one last time. The Kentucky State Police officially amended the investigation. The original search failure was no longer classified as an investigative mistake. It became documented evidence of deliberate obstruction. The announcement carried enormous consequences. Families with other unresolved investigations from the same era demanded reviews. Dozens of old case files were reopened. Several retired investigators voluntarily returned to assist. Sarah Whitmore's story had become larger than one homicide. It became proof that forgotten cases deserved another chance. Months later, Black Ridge High School dedicated a small scholarship in Sarah's name, not for criminal justice, not for forensic science, for history, the subject Sarah loved most. The scholarship description ended with one sentence: history matters because the truth belongs to everyone. Students read those words every year without fully understanding why they existed. Perhaps one day they would. Perhaps that was enough. One cold January morning, Detective Grayson visited the cemetery where Sarah had finally been laid to rest. No television crews, no speeches, only quiet snow falling across polished granite. He placed one white rose beside the headstone, then another, exactly 2 flowers, one for Sarah, one for every year he had promised himself he would never stop looking. As he turned to leave, he noticed fresh footprints already in the snow. Someone else had visited before sunrise. There were no flowers, only a folded piece of paper resting against the memorial. Sheriff Brooks unfolded it later that afternoon. It contained no signature, no address, only one sentence typed on an old typewriter. You solved Sarah's case. You haven't found all of ours. The room fell silent. Investigators immediately searched historical records for similar disappearances. 3 names appeared within minutes. 3 missing people. 3 different counties. 3 investigations handled during Richard Bell's years as sheriff. Each one dismissed. Each one forgotten. Each one involving property disputes connected to companies Jonathan Mercer once represented. Detective Grayson stared at the list for a long time. He had closed Sarah's notebook forever. But someone had quietly placed another one in front of him. Sheriff Brooks looked across the conference room. Do you think they're connected? Grayson answered without hesitation. I don't know. He picked up the anonymous letter one final time. But whoever sent this wanted us to keep asking questions. Outside, snow drifted slowly across the empty parking lot. The lights inside the sheriff's office remained on long after midnight. Old files returned to the tables. Maps covered the walls again. Coffee cups slowly accumulated beside stacks of forgotten reports. For the people inside that room, one investigation had ended. Another had just begun. Because sometimes solving a cold case doesn't close the past. Sometimes it reveals how much of the past is still waiting to be found. The following story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, locations, or events is purely coincidental. The anonymous letter changed the atmosphere inside the Black Ridge County Sheriff's Office. Only weeks earlier, everyone believed they were finally closing the door on the darkest chapter in the county's history. Sarah Whitmore had been found. The people responsible had been identified. The truth had survived. But now another question was sitting on the same desk, where Sarah's case file had rested for decades. Who sent the letter? And why? Detectives began with the obvious possibility. Someone connected to the original investigation wanted attention. Someone wanted revenge. Someone wanted to create another mystery. But after examining the letter, investigators noticed something unusual. The paper was old, not artificially aged, actually old. The typewriter used to create the message was a model commonly used in government offices during the late 1970s and early 1980s. The ink ribbon was worn. The letters were slightly uneven. A person had not typed this message recently. They had used an old machine, a machine they already owned. That detail made the investigation more complicated, because it suggested the sender was not creating a new story. They were continuing an old one. Sheriff Elena Brooks ordered a review of the 3 missing person cases mentioned in the letter. The names were Michael Reeves, Donna Carlisle, and James Holloway. 3 people who disappeared between 1978 and 1983. 3 cases that have remained unresolved. 3 names buried beneath decades of forgotten reports. The first file belonged to Michael Reeves. In 1978, Michael was a local accountant who worked with several land development companies. His disappearance was originally treated as voluntary. Investigators believe he left town because of financial problems. But when detectives reopened the file, they found something strange. Michael had been preparing an internal report about suspicious property transactions involving the same network of companies connected to Miller Quarry. The second file belonged to Donna Carlisle. She was a newspaper photographer. In 1980, she was investigating claims that several rural families had been pressured into selling their land. Her camera was recovered. Her photographs were missing. The third file belonged to James Holloway, a surveyor, a man who worked with geological reports, a man who disappeared shortly after requesting access to archived county records. The connections were impossible to ignore. Land, documents, missing evidence, silence witnesses. The Sarah Whitmore case had not been an isolated tragedy. It had been one piece of something larger. Detective Grayson returned to the original evidence room, the same room where he had spent countless nights during the investigation. The shelves had changed. The computers were newer, but the old files remained. He requested every document connected to property disputes between 1975 and 1985. Within hours, investigators found a pattern. The same names appeared repeatedly. Jonathan Mercer, Thomas Keller, Richard Bell, Victor Hale. But now there was another name, a name hidden beneath layers of paperwork, a name that appeared on only a few documents. Evelyn Cross. In 1981, Evelyn Cross was a county records assistant. She worked directly beneath the office responsible for storing land documents. Officially, she was a low-level employee, someone nobody considered important. But investigators discovered something surprising. Evelyn had accessed several files connected to the Corey investigation shortly before Sarah disappeared. She had also requested copies of documents related to property transfers. Then, 3 months later, she resigned. No explanation. No forguel. She disappeared from public records. Investigators tracked her to a small town in another state. When they finally located her, Evelyn was 86 years old. She agreed to speak. But before answering any questions, she asked one thing. Did you find Sarah? When Sheriff Brooks said yes, Evelyn closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her face. I always wondered if she would ever be found. That sentence shocked investigators, because Evelyn had never publicly claimed to know anything. Yet she spoke as if she had been waiting. The interview lasted nearly 4 hours. Evelyn revealed that in 1980, she discovered irregularities inside the county archive. Documents had been replaced, pages removed, records rewritten. She believed someone inside the courthouse was altering history. She secretly copied several documents. Then she gave them to Sarah. The two women had never been close friends, but Evelyn admired Sarah's determination. She believed Sarah was the only person brave enough to expose what was happening. But Evelyn also revealed something investigators had never heard before. Sarah was not supposed to meet Harold Vance at Miller Quarry that night. She was supposed to meet someone else, someone who claimed to have proof of the entire operation, someone who promised to reveal everything. Evelyn said Sarah received a phone call the afternoon she disappeared. After that call, Sarah changed her plans. She canceled her meeting with the newspaper reporter. She drove toward Miller Quarry, and she never returned. Investigators asked the obvious question. Who called her? Evelyn looked down, then answered, I don't know his name. A pause. But Sarah wrote it down. Every detective in the room leaned forward. Evelyn explained that before Sarah left, she stopped by the courthouse archive. She left a sealed envelope inside Evelyn's desk drawer. A message. A warning. Instructions. Evelyn had hidden it after Sarah disappeared. She was afraid. For 43 years she kept it, because she believed opening it would put someone else in danger. Sheriff Brooks asked a question that mattered. Why give it to us now? Evelyn looked toward the window, because Sarah finally got her answer. Another pause. And now it's time everyone else gets theirs. The next morning, investigators received the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Sarah's handwriting. Only 3 sentences. I know who has been helping them. I know why they're afraid. The person everyone trusts is the one who knows the most. Below those words was a name that caused the entire room to go silent, because it was not Richard Bell. Not Thomas Keller, not Jonathan Mercer. It was someone nobody had ever suspected, someone who had spent 40 years appearing as one of the people searching for the truth, someone who had helped solve Sarah's disappearance, and someone who may have known exactly how she vanished. Detective Grayson looked at the name for a long time. Then he slowly closed the file, because after 43 years of searching, the investigators finally understood the most dangerous part of the case. The secret had not been protected by strangers. It had been protected by someone standing beside them the entire time.